Bavaria, Germany, April 27, 1945. The morning air hung thick with moisture, a persistent drizzle that turned the ground to mud and made everything smell of wet earth and decay. In a makeshift prisoner camp near Munich, a young American soldier knelt in that mud, his uniform soaked through at the knees. His name was Private James Washington, 20 years old, from a small town outside Montgomery, Alabama. In his right hand, he held a wooden spoon. In his left, a metal bowl of hot beef stew, steam rising into the cold morning air. For him sat a woman, German, maybe 23, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. Starvation ages a person in ways that have nothing to do with time. Her cheekbones jutted sharp against skin stretched too tight. Her eyes, sunken deep into her skull, held the glazed look of someone who had stopped expecting anything good from the world. Her hands trembled constantly, small vibrations she could not control. Her Wehrmacht auxiliary uniform hung on her frame like a tent on poles, the fabric stained with mud and sweat and the accumulated grime of weeks without proper washing. Private Washington extended the spoon toward her mouth, moving slowly, carefully, the way you might approach a frightened animal. The woman's whole body went rigid. Her breathing quickened. Her eyes locked onto that spoon like it was a loaded weapon. "Take it slowly, ma'am," Washington said, his voice gentle, almost a whisper. "Just one spoon." The woman turned her head away, her lips pressed into a thin line. Behind her clenched jaw, her mind screamed the same question over and over again, a loop of terror she could not escape. Why won't they let us feed ourselves? What are they really doing to us? She was convinced, absolutely certain, that the food in that spoon would kill her, that this kind-faced soldier with his soft voice was offering her death disguised as mercy, and she was completely, utterly wrong. This is the story of how Catherine Weber came to believe that American kindness was the most dangerous thing in the world, and what happened when she discovered the truth. If you or someone you know served in the final days of World War II, this story will shake you to your core, because sometimes the enemy is not who you think it is. Sometimes propaganda runs so deep, it makes you fear the very people trying to save your life. And sometimes the greatest act of patriotism is showing mercy to those who have none left to give. 3 months earlier, Catherine Weber had been a different person. Not physically, not in any way you could see from the outside. But inside, where belief lives and shapes everything, she had been someone who still thought the world made sense. January 1945. Munich. The city was dying but would not admit it yet. Every night, the air raid sirens wailed their warnings. Every night, Catherine descended into the concrete bunker beneath the communications building and sat at her station with the heavy headphones clamped over her ears, listening to static and fragments of desperate messages from units that were running out of everything at once: ammunition, food, hope. She was a radio operator, one of 500,000 German women who had been pulled into the Wehrmacht auxiliary services because there were not enough men left. The men were dead or dying on two fronts that kept closing in like the jaws of a vice. Catherine's job was to receive coded messages, decode them, using the cipher books that were updated every 72 hours, and pass them along to officers who would turn those words into orders that sent other people to die. She told herself she was just doing her job, that she was not responsible for what happened after the messages left her hands, that she was serving her country the way any loyal citizen would. These were the lies that let her sleep at night when sleep came at all. Her father had died in 1943 on the Eastern Front. No body to bury, just a telegram delivered by a man in uniform who would not meet her mother's eyes. Her mother had died 6 months later when a British bomb hit their apartment building during a daylight raid. Catherine had been at work when it happened. She came home to a pile of rubble and a neighbor who put a hand on her shoulder and said nothing because there was nothing left to say. After that, Catherine had volunteered for the Helferinnen, not out of patriotic fervor, not because she believed in the speeches about the 1,000-year Reich or the destiny of the German people. She volunteered because she had nowhere else to go. No family, no home, just a uniform and a purpose, however hollow that purpose might be. In the radio room, the air always smelled of hot metal and stale cigarette smoke. The equipment gave off heat that made the small concrete space feel like an oven, even in winter. Catherine sat at her station for 8-hour shifts, sometimes longer, when the operators for the next shift did not show up. More and more often, they did not show up. People were disappearing, not taken, not arrested, just gone. slipping away into the chaos trying to get west before the Russians came. Catherine had one friend in that place, Sarah Muller, 19 years old, a clerk who processed supply requests that could no longer be filled. Sarah was all bright eyes and nervous laughter, the kind of person who tried to find something good to say about everything, even when the world was falling apart around her. She reminded Catherine of the sister she had never had. They ate lunch together when they could, bitter coffee made from roasted barley, bread that was more sawdust than flour. Sometimes, if they were lucky, a thin soup with a few pieces of potato floating in it. They did not talk about the war. They talked about small things. A book Sarah was reading, a song Catherine remembered from before, the weather, anything except the truth that was closing in from all sides. The propaganda had been relentless. For months, for years, Catherine and Sarah and every other German citizen had been told what would happen if the Allies won. Radio broadcasts described atrocities. Posters showed American and British soldiers as monsters with blood dripping from their teeth. The message was clear and constant. Surrender meant suffering. Capture meant death or worse. They were told that American soldiers would rape and murder German women, that the British would burn cities to ash out of pure hatred, that the Russians would make everyone wish for death before they granted it. The stories about the Eastern Front were real enough. Catherine had heard them from soldiers passing through Munich. Women impaled on bayonets, children shot in the streets, entire villages erased. Whether those stories were true or exaggerated did not matter. They felt true, and they made everything else feel true too. In March, Catherine's commanding officer had called all the women together in the main hall. He was an older man, gray-haired with the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile. He stood before them and spoke in a flat, tired voice that made his words even more terrible. "If you are captured by the enemy," he said, "they will do things to you that I will not describe. You know what I mean. The Americans are no better than the Russians. They simply hide it better. If you are taken, it would be better to end your own life quickly. Save yourselves the suffering." Catherine had watched one of the women in the front row slip her hand into her pocket and pull out a small piece of broken glass. She held it for a moment, testing the edge with her thumb, then tucked it away again. Catherine understood. That night, she took a razor blade from the supply closet and sewed it into the hem of her uniform skirt, just in case. She never thought she would actually use it. It was insurance, a way to have control over the one thing that could not be taken from her. The manner of her death. April came, and with it the unmistakable signs of collapse. The radio messages became more frantic and less coherent. Units reported being surrounded. Requests for reinforcement went unanswered. Officers stopped giving orders and started asking questions nobody could answer. Where are the reserves? When is the counterattack? Is anyone still in command? Hitler's death was announced on the radio. Solemn music, a speech about heroic sacrifice. But everyone knew the truth before it was spoken aloud. The Führer had killed himself in a bunker in Berlin rather than face what was coming. If he had given up, what hope did anyone else have? On the morning of April 15th, Catherine and Sarah arrived at the communications building to find it nearly empty. The officers were gone. Most of the male soldiers were gone. The vehicles were gone. Just 47 women remained standing in the cold dawn light, looking at each other and waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. Nobody came. They had no food. The supply depot had been emptied in the night. They had no orders. The chain of command had dissolved like sugar in rain. They had no transportation, no communication with any higher authority. They were alone. For the first 3 days, they stayed in the building, hoping someone would return. They ate what little they could find. Old crackers, a few cans of mystery meat that had been forgotten in a storage room. Sarah found a bag of oats meant for horses, and they divided it up, chewing the raw grain until their jaws ached. On the 4th day, they heard American tanks in the distance. The sound was unmistakable, a low rumble that you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears. Some of the women wanted to run, others wanted to stay and surrender. Catherine did not know what she wanted. She was too tired and too hungry to make decisions anymore. By the 7th day, they were starving. Not the kind of hunger that makes your stomach growl, the kind that makes you weak and confused and desperate. Catherine's hands shook so badly she could barely hold anything. When she stood up too quickly, the world tilted and went dark at the edges. Sarah had stopped talking. She just sat against the wall with her eyes half closed, conserving energy she did not have. Catherine chewed on the leather strap of her equipment bag. It gave her something to do with her mouth. It made her feel like she was eating, even though she was not. She knew it was pointless, but she could not stop. Her body demanded the ritual of consumption, even when there was nothing to consume. On the eighth day, they heard voices outside the building. Loud. American accents shouting in broken German. The women huddled together in the main room, holding each other, shaking. This was it. The moment they had been warned about. The moment when everything would become as terrible as they had been told it would be. Catherine closed her eyes and thought about the razor blade in her hem. She could feel it there. A small weight. A promise. If they tried to hurt her, she would use it. She was ready to die. She was not ready for what actually happened. The door opened. American soldiers came in with their rifles held ready but not aimed. They looked around the room at the starving women and their faces changed. Catherine saw surprise. She saw something that looked almost like pity. She did not see hatred. She did not see cruelty. A voice over a megaphone speaking careful German. You are now under American protection. Medical assistance is coming. Do not be afraid. Catherine did not believe it. This had to be a trick, a psychological tactic. They were lulling the women into a false sense of security before the real horror began. That was the only explanation that made sense. The soldiers left. The women sat in silence waiting. An hour passed, then another. Nothing happened. No violence. No screaming. Just silence. Then trucks arrived. American medics started setting up a field hospital in the building next door. Catherine watched through the window as they unloaded crates of supplies. Bandages, medicine, food. So much food. The smell drifted through the broken windows. Meat, bread, coffee. Real coffee, not the roasted grain substitute they had been drinking for years. Catherine's stomach clenched so hard it hurt. Her mouth flooded with saliva, but the fear was stronger than the hunger. This was bait. This had to be bait. Sergeant William Cooper had been a medic for 3 years. He had served in North Africa, where the heat could kill you just as efficiently as enemy fire. He had been at Sicily, where he learned that war smelled like copper and cordite and fierce sweat all mixed together. He had landed at Normandy on D+3, wading through water that was still cloudy with blood past bodies that bobbed in the surf like terrible driftwood. He had seen things that would live in his nightmares forever. He had held dying men and lied to them about how everything would be fine. He had written letters to mothers he would never meet, trying to explain how their sons had died bravely, when the truth was they had died screaming and afraid and far from home. But the thing that haunted him most happened in Italy in 1943. His unit had liberated a prisoner of war camp, not a concentration camp, just a regular POW facility where Italian soldiers had been held after their country switched sides. The conditions had been bad. The men were skeletal. Some could barely stand. They had been living on a few hundred calories a day for months. The American command had done what seemed like the obvious humane thing. They fed the prisoners. Hot meals. All they could eat. Bread and meat and vegetables. A feast after so much deprivation. Within 48 hours, 23 men were dead. Cooper had been there when it happened. He had watched men who survived years of starvation die from the very thing that should have saved them. Their bodies could not handle the sudden influx of food. Their hearts gave out. Their lungs filled with fluid. Their organs, weakened by months of malnutrition, simply failed under the strain of digestion. He had held a 19-year-old Italian kid named Marco. While the boy died, his heart rhythm gone chaotic and useless. Marco had been so happy an hour before eating bread and laughing with his friends. Then he clutched his chest. Then he fell. Then he was gone. After that, Cooper studied. He read every medical text he could find about starvation and recovery. He learned about something called refeeding syndrome, the way a starving body changes its chemistry, the way sudden nutrition can trigger catastrophic electrolyte imbalances, the way kindness delivered too quickly can kill just as surely as cruelty. He swore to himself he would never let it happen again. Never stand by while someone died from food that was meant to save them. Now standing in this muddy camp near Munich, looking at these skeletal German women, Cooper saw Marco's face in every one of them. He saw young people caught in a war. They did not start victims of decisions made by men in distant rooms who would never face the consequences of their orders. The other soldiers saw enemy combatants, Nazis in skirts, people who had supported a regime that murdered millions. Maybe they were right. But Cooper saw something else too. He saw daughters and sisters and maybe mothers. He saw human beings on the edge of death who needed help regardless of what flag they had served under. He gathered his medics and gave them clear instructions. Feed them slowly, one spoon at a time. No more than a few ounces every 3 hours. Monitor them constantly. Watch for signs of cardiac distress, respiratory problems, any indication that their bodies were struggling to process nutrition. Do not let them eat on their own. Do not give them access to large amounts of food. Control every portion, every bite. I don't care if they hate us for it, Cooper said. I don't care if they think we're torturing them. We're keeping them alive. That's all that matters. Private Washington had volunteered for this duty. Some of the white soldiers did not want to get that close to German prisoners, especially not German women. There were too many complicated feelings mixed up in that. Anger at what Germany had done. Discomfort with showing kindness to the enemy. A vague sense that getting too personal would somehow betray the men who had died fighting them. Washington did not see it that way. He had grown up in Alabama where he was not allowed to eat at the same lunch counter as white people, where he could not drink from the same water fountain or use the same bathroom, where his father had been beaten by police for looking at a white woman the wrong way. Washington knew what it felt like to be seen as less than human. He would not do that to anyone else, enemy or not. So now he knelt in the mud with a bowl of stew and a spoon, trying to convince a terrified German woman that he was not trying to kill her. Catherine looked at the American soldier kneeling in front of her. He was young, black. She had never seen a black person in real life before. The propaganda had told her that black American soldiers were especially brutal. Savages, the posters said. Animals. She looked at his face and saw none of that. She saw patience. She saw something that looked almost kind. He held out the spoon. Steam rose from the stew. The smell made her dizzy with longing. Beef, carrots, onions, flavors she had forgotten existed. Her stomach cramped painfully, demanding she eat, now eat anything. But her mind screamed louder. This is how they do it. Poison delivered with a smile. Death disguised as charity. She turned her head away. The soldier did not force her. He just waited. The spoon still extended, his expression patient. Then he did something that shocked her. He brought the spoon to his own mouth and ate it, right in front of her. He swallowed, smiled slightly, and said something in English she did not understand. But the meaning was clear. See, it's safe. It's just food. Catherine's mind raced through explanations. Maybe the poison only affected Germans. Maybe he had taken an antidote beforehand. Maybe this was an elaborate psychological game. Anything except the simple truth that he was trying to help her. Around the camp, other soldiers were doing the same thing with other women. Kneeling in the mud, offering spoons of hot food, speaking in gentle voices. Some women accepted, some refused. But nobody was forced. Nobody was hurt. Catherine watched another woman, someone she did not know well, accept a spoonful. The woman swallowed, her eyes closed. A small sound escaped her throat, something between a sob and a moan. She was still alive. She did not collapse. She did not scream in pain. She just ate. 5 minutes passed. The woman was still alive, still breathing normally. The soldier offered her another spoonful. She took it. Catherine looked at Private Washington. He was still holding the spoon toward her, waiting. His arm must be getting tired, but he showed no sign of impatience. She thought about dying, about the razor blade in her hem, about how easy it would be to just refuse everything and let starvation finish what the war had started. But another part of her, the part that had survived this long, the part that was stubborn and angry and unwilling to give up, made a different calculation. If I'm going to die anyway, why not die with a full stomach? She opened her mouth. Washington carefully placed the spoon between her lips. Catherine closed them around the smooth wood. The liquid touched her tongue and her whole world exploded into sensation. Warm, salt, fat, meat, the taste of something that was not stale bread or raw oats or leather. Actual food, real food, food that had been cooked with care and seasoned and meant to nourish rather than barely sustain. She swallowed. The warmth traveled down her throat and into her stomach. For one brief, perfect moment, she forgot to be afraid. Then reality crashed back. She had swallowed it. The poison, if there was poison, was inside her now. There was no taking it back. Her body went rigid. She waited for the pain, for the burning, for her heart to stutter and stop, for whatever terrible thing was supposed to happen next. Nothing happened. Washington was saying something, the same two words over and over. She did not speak English, but she could hear the tone. Gentle, encouraging, trying to calm her. He offered another spoonful. Catherine's hunger overrode her fear. She accepted it. Then another, then another. Each time Washington waited several minutes before offering the next one. Each time he spoke those same gentle words. Across the camp, 47 starving women were making the same terrifying choice, accepting food from the enemy, swallowing what they had been taught to believe was poison, waiting to see if they would survive the mercy. Catherine finished what was in the bowl, maybe 8 ounces total. Her stomach felt uncomfortably full from even that small amount. She had not eaten this much at once in weeks. Washington stood it up, nodded at her in a way that seemed almost respectful, and moved on to the next woman. Catherine sat there, her whole body shaking. Not from cold, from the absolute terror of what came next. Sarah was next to her. Her best friend had also eaten. They looked at each other, both pale, both trembling. "Kate," Sarah whispered. It was the first word she had spoken in hours. "What did we just do?" "I don't know," Catherine whispered back. "I don't know." They waited. 30 minutes passed. Catherine counted every heartbeat, waiting for the rhythm to change, waiting for the pain, waiting for the darkness. Her hands were shaking, but that was not new. They had been shaking for days from hunger. She tried to notice if anything felt different, if anything felt wrong. She felt warmer. The shaking in her hands was less intense. Her head, which had been foggy and unclear for so long, felt sharper. She could think more easily, form complete thoughts instead of just fragments. But this made no sense. If they were poisoning her, she should feel worse, not better. Unless this was part of it. Unless the poison worked slowly. Unless they wanted the women to feel better first, so the decline would be more cruel when it came. Catherine looked around the camp. Other women were having the same reaction. Confusion, fear, suspicious relief. Nobody was dying. Nobody was even sick. They were just sitting there, warmer than before, less hungry than before, more alive than before. An older woman named Greta started crying, not from sadness, from something more complicated. She pulled her blanket around herself and sobbed into the rough wool. When Sarah asked her what was wrong, Greta could barely speak. "Why are they giving us things?" she managed between sobs. "Why are they being kind? What do they want from us?" Nobody had an answer. That afternoon, more American soldiers arrived with more supplies. Blankets. Clean blankets that smelled like storage and dust but were dry and warm. They handed them out to every woman. No questions asked. No demands made. Just blankets, freely given. Catherine wrapped herself in hers and felt warmth for the first time in weeks. The fabric was thick and heavy. Military issue. The kind of thing that was supposed to keep American soldiers alive through European winters. And now it was keeping her alive instead. She thought about the propaganda, about everything she had been told, about the monsters who were supposed to torture and kill German women. She looked at the young black soldier who had fed her, now handing out blankets to other prisoners with the same patient kindness. She looked at the medic supervising everything, an older man with tired eyes who checked on each woman like he actually cared if they lived or died. For the first time since the Americans arrived, Catherine allowed herself to wonder something dangerous. What if everything I have been told about these people is a lie? But she was not ready to believe it yet, not completely, because the alternative was too enormous. If the Americans were not the monsters she had been taught to fear, then who were the real monsters? And what did that say about everything she had believed, everything she had done? That night, Catherine lay wrapped in her American blanket, listening to the sounds of the camp. Guards talking quietly in English. Someone laughing. A radio playing music somewhere, something soft and sad. She thought about the razor blade in her hem. She had not needed it today. Maybe she would not need it tomorrow either. But she kept it there anyway, just in case. because tomorrow the Americans would come back with more food. Tomorrow she would have to make the same choice again, accept help from the enemy, trust the people she had been taught never to trust, believe that kindness could be real even when it came from the wrong side. Tomorrow would bring new fears, new questions, and slowly, terrifyingly new possibilities that Catherine was not yet ready to face. Morning came slowly to the camp. Catherine had not slept. She had spent the night in a state between waking and dreaming, her body exhausted, but her mind racing through scenarios of what would happen when the poison finally took effect. But dawn arrived and she was still alive. Her heart was still beating, her lungs still pulled air. The only thing different was that she felt stronger than she had in weeks. The second morning, April 28th. The drizzle had stopped, but the sky remained gray, a ceiling of clouds that pressed down on everything. Catherine sat wrapped in her American blanket, watching the camp slowly wake around her. Other women stirring, whispered conversations, the sound of someone crying softly in the next tent. Then the smell came again, drifting on the morning air like a memory made solid. Food, cooking, meat and potatoes, and something else Catherine could not quite identify. Her stomach clenched with want so powerful it was almost painful. She had eaten yesterday and not died, but the fear had not left her. It had only changed shape. The American soldiers appeared carrying the same metal bowls, the same wooden spoons. Private Washington among them. He saw Catherine and walked toward her, his boots squelching in the mud. In his hands a bowl of what looked like potato soup with chunks of chicken floating in pale broth. He knelt in front of her again, same position as yesterday, and Catherine saw something in his face that confused her. He looked almost happy to see her, like he was genuinely glad she had survived the night, like her continued existence mattered to him somehow. Washington held out the spoon. Then he did something different. He held out the bowl too, offering both. He spoke in English, his tone questioning. Catherine did not understand the words, but she understood the gesture. He was asking if she wanted to feed herself today. Catherine's heart started hammering. This was it, the trap. If she took the bowl, if she controlled how much she ate, they could not regulate the poison. They could not ensure she swallowed the right amount. Unless taking the bowl meant something else, meant accepting responsibility for her own death, meant they could claim she had chosen this. She shook her head sharply. No, she would not take the bowl. Washington did not seem offended. He just nodded like he understood something she had not said out loud and went back to the routine from yesterday. One spoonful, wait, another spoonful, wait. His patience was infinite, and that made it more terrifying somehow. The soup was different from yesterday's stew, but just as good. The potatoes were soft, almost dissolving on her tongue. The chicken was real meat, not the mystery substance they had been eating for months. Catherine let herself focus on the taste, the warmth, the simple physical sensation of being fed. It was easier than thinking about what it meant. When Washington moved on to the next woman, Catherine found herself watching him. Watching all the American soldiers, actually. The way they moved through the camp, the way they interacted with each other and with the German prisoners. There was a young soldier, barely 20, with red hair and freckles that made him look even younger. He was handing out pieces of bread to supplement the soup. When he gave Sarah her portion, he smiled at her. Not a predatory smile, not cruel, just friendly, like they were two people sharing breakfast instead of enemy and prisoner. Catherine saw two American soldiers sitting on a supply crate eating their own rations and talking. One was black, one was white. They sat side by side sharing jokes, completely at ease with each other. The propaganda had told Catherine that America was a country of racial hatred where black people were treated as subhuman. But here they were eating together, laughing together, with no apparent tension between them. A medic spent 15 minutes bandaging a small cut on an older German woman's hand. The injury was minor, barely worth noticing, but he cleaned it carefully, applied antiseptic that made the woman wince, wrapped it in clean white gauze. He used medical supplies on an enemy prisoner for a wound that would heal on its own in a few days. Why? Why waste resources on people who did not matter? Sarah leaned close to Catherine, her voice barely a whisper. Kate, they're not like we were told. Catherine knew what Sarah meant, but she could not bring herself to agree out loud. Because if the Americans were not monsters, If everything they had been taught was a lie, then what did that make Catherine and Sarah and everyone else who had believed? What did it make the people who had told them those lies? Or they're very good at pretending, Catherine said. But even as the words left her mouth, she did not quite believe them. That afternoon, Sergeant William Cooper walked through the camp doing medical checks. He was older than most of the soldiers, maybe late 30s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of face that had seen too much. He moved from woman to woman, checking pulses, looking into eyes, asking questions through a translator. When he reached Catherine, he stopped longer than he had with the others. He took her wrist, gently fingers on her pulse point. His hands were warm and calloused. Doctor's hands, Catherine thought. Hands that had touched a lot of sick people. Cooper looked into her eyes with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she forced herself to hold his gaze. He was examining her pupils, she realized, checking for something. Signs of illness, maybe. Or signs that the poison was working. He released her wrist and said something to the translator, a German-American sergeant from somewhere in the Midwest. The translator turned to Catherine. "The doctor says you are doing better. Your color's coming back." Catherine said nothing. What was there to say? "Thank you for not killing me yet." Cooper spoke again, and the translator relayed his words. "He says he knows you are scared, but they are trying to help." That broke through Catherine's silence. She looked directly at Cooper and spoke in German, knowing the translator would convey it. "Why do you need to say that? If you are really trying to help, why do you have to tell us?" Cooper listened to the translation, then replied. The translator's voice carried his words. "Because he can see the fear in your eyes. He wants you to know that the fear is not necessary." Catherine felt something shift inside her chest. Not belief, not yet, but the first crack in the wall she had built. This man, this enemy, was looking at her like she was a person. Not a prisoner, not a Nazi, just a frightened young woman who needed reassurance. "How do I know," Catherine said slowly, "that you are telling the truth?" Cooper's face softened. He replied, and the translator spoke. "You don't. You can only watch what we do and decide for yourself." Then Cooper moved on to the next woman, leaving Catherine with more questions than answers. That evening, as the light faded from the gray sky, Catherine made a decision. She stood up, wrapped her blanket around her shoulders like armor, and walked across the muddy ground to where Sergeant Cooper sat outside the medical tent writing in a notebook. She stood there until he looked up. When he saw her, surprise crossed his face, followed quickly by something that might have been approval. He gestured to a wooden crate nearby, indicating she should sit. The translator appeared summoned by some invisible signal. Catherine sat. Cooper waited. The moment stretched out, filled only with the sound of distant voices and the scratch of Cooper's pen on paper as he finished whatever he was writing. Finally, Catherine spoke. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "Why are you feeding us this way, one spoon at a time? Why not just give us the food?" Cooper set down his pen. He looked at her with those tired, intelligent eyes and spoke carefully. The translator kept pace with his words. "Because if you eat too much too quickly after starving, it can wait." Catherine felt like the ground had shifted beneath her. "Kill us from eating." "Yes," Cooper said through the translator. "Your body forgets how to handle food. Your heart can fail. Your lungs can fill with fluid. Your organs can shut down. It happens within hours." Catherine's mind was racing. This made no sense. Food was supposed to sustain life, not end it, unless this was a more elaborate lie. Unless he was trying to justify the slow poisoning by claiming it was for their own good. "I don't understand," she said. Cooper leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. He spoke slowly, making sure each word was clear. "In 1943, we liberated a prisoner camp in Italy. The men there had not eaten properly in months. We gave them all the food they wanted, hot meals, bread, everything. We thought we were helping them." He paused. Something painful crossed his face. "Within 2 days, 23 of them were dead." Catherine's breath caught. Sarah had followed her and was standing nearby listening. Other women had gathered, too drawn by the conversation. Everyone was silent. "Their hearts stopped," Cooper continued. "Their lungs filled with fluid. Their bodies could not handle the sudden food. I was there. I watched them die. I held a 19-year-old boy while his heart gave out. He had been so happy an hour before, eating, laughing, then he was dead. The translator's voice shook slightly as he conveyed this. Since then, Cooper said, every American medic learns this. When you find starving people, you feed them slowly, very slowly, one spoon at a time. You control every portion. You monitor them constantly. It is not punishment. It is not control for its own sake. It is the only way to keep them alive. Catherine felt something crack inside her chest, not her ribs, something deeper, something that had been holding up her entire understanding of the world. That is why, she whispered, that is why you will not let us eat on our own. Yes, Cooper said simply. The women stood in silence. Catherine looked at Sarah and saw tears running down her friend's face. Not from sadness, from the terrible weight of understanding. All this time, all this fear. They had thought the Americans were poisoning them with kindness. They had thought the careful, controlled feeding was part of some cruel plan, when the truth was exactly the opposite. The Americans were keeping them alive, protecting them from the very food that should save them. You were trying to help us, Catherine said. It was not a question. It was the sound of a belief system collapsing. The whole time, you were trying to save us. Yes, Cooper said again. An older woman named Greta stepped forward. She was shaking. We thought you were killing us. We thought you were going to kill us with the food. Cooper looked at her with such sadness that Catherine had to look away. Through the translator, he said, I know. We could see it in your faces, but we could not let you die, even if you hated us for helping you. Another woman, Maria, asked the question they were all thinking. Her voice was barely audible. Why would you care? We are your enemy. Cooper was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Catherine's throat tight. Because you are human beings. Because you are somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, maybe somebody's mother. The war is over. You lost. But that does not mean you deserve to do. That is not what America stands for. The silence that followed was absolute. 47 German women stood in a muddy prison camp and heard an American soldier tell them that their lives had value, that their humanity mattered even in defeat, that kindness was not a trap but a principle. Catherine thought about the propaganda posters, the radio broadcast warning of American brutality, the officer who had told them to kill themselves rather than be captured. All of it lies, all of it designed to make them afraid of the very people who would show them mercy. She thought about the regime she had served, the messages she had transmitted, the orders she had helped carry out. What had those orders led to? What had she been part of without knowing or without wanting to know? The women dispersed slowly, each lost in her own thoughts. Catherine and Sarah walked back to their tent without speaking. What was there to say? Everything had changed and nothing had changed. They were still prisoners, still defeated, still uncertain of what came next. But the fear had transformed into something else, something Catherine did not have a name for yet. That night, Catherine reached down and felt for the razor blade in her hem. Her fingers found the small, hard shape through the fabric. She had kept it there as insurance, as a final act of control in a world that had taken everything from her. She pulled out a small sewing kit she had kept in her pocket. Carefully, she unpicked the stitches, holding the blade in place. The metal fell into her palm, small and sharp and completely unnecessary now. Catherine walked to the edge of the camp where the fence met the mud. She threw the blade as far as she could. It disappeared into the darkness without a sound. She did not need it anymore. For the first time since the war began, she was not planning how to die. She was thinking about how to live. The next morning brought more changes. Day 3 in American custody. The women were told they could wash, really wash, not just wipe themselves down with cold water and a rag. The Americans had set up a shower facility. Hot water, they said. Soap. Privacy. Catherine stood in line with the others, still not quite believing it could be true. Hot water was a luxury from another life. From before the war. From when the world made sense. Rumors spread through the line. A woman from another section of the camp said she had already bathed. She described it in hushed, almost reverent tones. Real soap, clean towels, water hot enough to steam. Catherine listened and tried not to hope too much. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment, and disappointment could break you when you were already this fragile. But when Catherine's turn came, and she stepped into the canvas enclosure, and a female American nurse showed her how to work the simple shower controls. When the water came out hot and clean and endless, she understood that some things were too real to be tricks. Catherine stood under the spray and let the water run over her head, down her back, washing away weeks of accumulated dirt and fear. She used the soap, which smelled like lavender, a scent she had not experienced since her mother's garden before the bombs. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink and clean. She washed her hair 3 times, working the soap through tangles that had become permanent fixtures. The water at her feet ran brown at first, then gray, then finally clear. She watched the dirt of the war spiral down the drain and felt something inside her start to loosen. Not heal, not yet, but loosen enough to breathe. She thought about what the Americans could have done. They could have left the women filthy. They could have treated them like animals. They could have taken away every shred of dignity along with their freedom. Instead, they gave them soap and hot water and privacy. They gave them the chance to feel human again. When Catherine emerged wrapped in a clean towel, her skin pink from heat and scrubbing, Sarah was waiting. Her friend's eyes were red from crying. "I forgot," Sarah whispered. "I forgot what it felt like to be clean." They were given fresh clothes. Not new, not their own, but clean, laundered. The fabric smelled like soap and sunshine. Catherine dressed slowly, savoring the feeling of clean cloth against clean skin. It was such a small thing, but after so long with nothing small, things became enormous. That afternoon, Catherine saw Sarah talking to one of the American soldiers. Not Washington, a different one. He was showing her pictures from his wallet. His family, Catherine realized. Wife, 2 little girls. Sarah was smiling, actually smiling. When had Catherine last seen her friend smile? The soldier said something and Sarah laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of her by whatever joke he had told. The sound of it made Catherine's chest ache. Joy. When had any of them last felt joy? Catherine found herself watching Sergeant Cooper again. He was writing in his notebook, the same focused expression on his face. She wondered what he was writing. Medical notes probably, recording their progress or lack thereof. Doing his job with the same careful attention he brought to everything. She thought about his face when he had told the story of the Italian prisoners. The pain there, the guilt. He carried those deaths with him. 23 men he could not save because he had not known how. And now he was using what he learned from that failure to save others. Even enemies, even people who feared and hated him. What kind of man did that? What kind of country produced men like that? Cooper looked up and caught her staring. For a moment, their eyes met across the muddy space between them. He nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. Catherine nodded back. It felt like something important had passed between them, though she could not have said what. That evening, the Americans made an announcement. Through translators, they told the women that soon they would be released, sent back to their homes or what was left of their homes. The war in Europe was officially over. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. There would be no more fighting. The women received this news in silence. There was no celebration, no tears of relief, just a heavy, complicated feeling that had no name. The war was over. They had lost. Everything they had been told to believe in had fallen apart, and somehow impossibly they were still alive. But then Cooper stood up. He looked uncomfortable, like he did not want to say what he was about to say, but felt he had to anyway. Through the translator, his words reached them. There is something else you need to know, something we have learned as we have moved through Germany. He paused, the silence stretched. We have been finding camps, not prisoner of war camps, different camps, places where the Nazi regime imprisoned and murdered civilians. Jews, Roma, political prisoners, disabled people. Millions of them. Catherine felt ice forming in her stomach. Cooper continued, his voice flat, factual, like he was reading a medical report. The camps had gas chambers disguised as showers, crematoriums, mass graves, evidence of systematic industrial-scale murder. He looked at the women. His expression was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was tired and disappointed in humanity itself. I am telling you this not to punish you, not to make you feel guilty, but because you need to know. You need to see what the regime you served was actually doing. He had photographs. He did not force anyone to look, but he left them on a table where anyone who wanted could see. Catherine made herself look. She owed that much, to look, to see, to witness. The images were worse than anything her imagination could have produced. Skeletal bodies stacked like cordwood, children's shoes piled in vast warehouses, gas chambers with scratch marks on the walls where people had tried to claw their way out. Catherine looked until she could not look anymore. Then she walked away and vomited into the mud. Sarah was beside her, also sick, also shaking. Around them, other women were having the same reaction. Horror, denial, the desperate wish to unsee what had been seen. This was the regime Catherine had served. These were the people she had helped, however indirectly, with every message she transmitted, every order she relayed. She had not known. But should she have known? Were there signs she ignored, questions she did not ask because she was afraid of the answers? That night, no one slept. The women gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed voices, sharing what they had seen, what they had heard, what they should have noticed. Greta had once seen trains passing through Munich, cattle cars packed with people, but she had told herself they were being relocated. Maria had heard rumors about camps, but dismissed them as enemy propaganda. Everyone had a story of something they had seen or heard and chosen not to investigate further. Everyone had been complicit in some small way through their silence, their willingness to believe comfortable lies instead of uncomfortable truths. Catherine sat with Sarah, both of them wrapped in their American blankets, and felt the full weight of what it meant to have been on the wrong side. Not just the losing side, the evil side. "What do we do now?" Sarah whispered. "How do we live with this?" Catherine did not have an answer. She only knew that the Americans, the enemies she had been taught to fear and hate, had shown her more humanity in 3 days than her own government had shown its people in 12 years. That had to mean something. That had to change something. The next morning, Sergeant Cooper made another announcement. He was looking for volunteers. Women who spoke German and were willing to help at the hospitals being set up for concentration camp survivors. No one would be forced, but if anyone wanted to do something to make some kind of amends, this was a way. Catherine stood up before she could talk herself out of it. "I will go." Sarah grabbed her arm. "Kate, you do not have to." "Yes, I do," Catherine said. "I cannot just go home and pretend I do not know. I have to do something." 6 other women volunteered. Cooper looked at them with something that might have been respect. "We leave tomorrow," he said. That night, Catherine walked through the camp one last time. This place where she had been so afraid. This place where she had learned that the world was not what she thought it was. This place where enemy had become something more complicated than she had words for. Private Washington found her near the medical tent. He was holding something small wrapped in brown paper. "Ma'am," he said, and she understood the tone, even if not the words. He held out the package. Catherine unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a bar of chocolate. Hershey's, the wrapper said. American chocolate. She had never tasted it before. She broke off a small piece and put it in her mouth. It was different from German chocolate. Sweeter, creamier, but good, very good. "Thank you," she said in German, knowing he would understand the meaning if not the words. "For everything." Washington smiled. He held out his hand. Catherine shook it. Not enemy and prisoner anymore. Just 2 people who had survived something together. She saved the rest of the chocolate for Sarah. They ate it slowly that night, letting each piece melt on their tongues, tasting sweetness and possibility, and the strange, terrifying hope of a future neither of them could yet imagine. Tomorrow they would leave this place. Tomorrow Catherine would begin the work of making amends for what her silence had allowed. Tomorrow she would face the survivors of the camps she had helped sustain through her willingness to serve without questioning. But tonight she had chocolate and a blanket and a friend beside her. Tonight she was alive. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, being alive felt like enough. 10 days into American custody, the rules changed again. Sergeant Cooper gathered the women in the main area of the camp, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds that had hung over Bavaria for weeks. He stood before them with his translator, and Catherine noticed he looked less tired than he had when they first arrived. Maybe saving lives instead of watching people die had given him something back. "Starting today," the translator conveyed, "you can feed yourselves." A ripple of surprise moved through the group. Cooper raised his hand for quiet and continued, "But you must still eat small portions. 4 times a day, no more. Your bodies are not ready for normal meals yet. We will give you the food. You control how you eat it. But if you eat too much, too fast, you can still die. Do you understand?" The women nodded. Catherine felt something shift inside her. Trust. They were being trusted. Given back a piece of autonomy even though misusing it could kill them. The Americans believed they would choose to live carefully rather than eat recklessly. When had anyone believed in her capacity for good judgment? When had anyone treated her like an adult capable of making decisions about her own survival? When the food came that morning, Private Washington handed Catherine her bowl directly. Chicken soup again with vegetables and small pieces of potato. The bowl was warm in her hands. Real weight, real substance. She looked down at the contents and felt her mouth water immediately, but she made herself wait. She lifted the spoon slowly, brought it to her lips, tasted, swallowed. The soup was good, seasoned with herbs she could not identify. She wanted to consume it all at once, fill the emptiness that still lived in her stomach despite 10 days of careful feeding. But she remembered Cooper's warning. She remembered the story of the Italian prisoners. She ate one spoonful, put the spoon down, waited. Sarah sat beside her doing the same thing. They had developed a rhythm. Eat, wait, breathe, eat again, making the small portion last, giving their bodies time to process, choosing life over the immediate gratification that could kill them. "It tastes better when we feed ourselves," Sarah said quietly. Catherine understood what she meant. The food had not changed, but the experience of eating it had transformed completely. This was not sustenance delivered to a prisoner. This was a meal consumed by a person with agency. The difference was everything. Around them, other women were having the same realization. Greta was crying again, but this time the tears seemed different, lighter somehow. Maria smiled as she ate a small expression of simple pleasure that looked strange on a face that had been so grim for so long. The young red-haired American soldier, whose name Catherine had learned was Murphy, sat nearby eating his own ration. He caught Catherine's eye and gave her a thumbs up, a gesture she had learned meant approval or encouragement. She nodded back and something passed between them. Not quite friendship, but not enmity either. Something new, something the old world had no name for. That afternoon, one of the German women approached Sergeant Cooper with a request. Her name was Anna, a former cook who had worked in an officer's mess before everything fell apart. She spoke through the translator, her voice hesitant but determined. "I would like to cook something. For you. For the soldiers. To say thank you." Cooper looked surprised. He glanced at Private Washington, who shrugged and smiled. Then Cooper nodded. "Why not?" he said. The Americans provided ingredients. Not much. Potatoes, onions, a little bit of flour, some butter. Anna worked with what she had, her hands moving with the confidence of someone doing something they knew well. Other women helped, peeling, chopping, stirring. For a few hours, the camp smelled like a kitchen instead of a prison. That evening, they ate together. American soldiers and German prisoners at the same makeshift tables, passing bowls back and forth, sharing a meal that had been prepared by former enemies. The potato pancakes Anna had made were simple but good. Crispy on the outside, soft inside, seasoned with salt and a hint of onion. Catherine found herself sitting across from Private Washington. He pointed to the pancakes and said something in English that sounded appreciative. She did not need translation for the smile on his face or the way he reached for a second helping. Murphy was telling a story, his hands gesturing animatedly, and even though Catherine could not understand the words, she found herself laughing at his expressions. Sarah was laughing too. So was Maria. When had laughter come back? When had it become possible to find anything funny in this world of mud and defeat? Sergeant Cooper sat at the edge of the gathering, watching everything with those tired, intelligent eyes. Catherine saw him writing in his notebook again, pausing occasionally to eat, always observing, always documenting, bearing witness to this strange moment of humanity in the aftermath of inhumanity. After the meal, Catherine gathered her courage and approached him. He looked up as she came near, set down his notebook, and waited for her to speak. "I need to ask you something," she said. The translator appeared ready to facilitate. Cooper nodded for her to continue. Catherine took a breath. "What I did during the war, I was a radio operator. I transmitted messages, orders. Those orders sent soldiers into battle. Some of them probably died because of messages I sent. How do I live with that? Cooper was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his words coming slowly through translation. War makes killers of people who would never kill. It makes us all complicit in violence we would reject in peacetime. You transmitted messages because that was your duty. Soldiers followed orders because that was theirs. The men who died because of decisions made far above your pay grade. But I helped them die, Catherine insisted. I was part of it. Yes, Cooper said, you were, and that is something you will carry forever. I carry the men I could not save. Every soldier here carries something. The question is not whether you were part of it. The question is what you do now that you know the truth. I do not know what to do, Catherine admitted. Then do the next right thing, Cooper said. And when you figure out what that is, do the one after that. You cannot undo the past. You can only build something different in the future. Catherine felt tears on her face. She had not realized she was crying. Is that enough, just doing the next right thing? It is a start, Cooper said. And sometimes a start is all we get. That night, Catherine lay in her tent thinking about those words. Do the next right thing. What was the next right thing she had volunteered to help at the hospital for concentration camp survivors? That felt right. That felt like something meaningful. But would it be enough? Could anything ever be enough to balance the scales? She thought about the regime she had served. Not just the orders she had transmitted, but the smaller acts of complicity. The times she had looked away from things that made her uncomfortable. The questions she had not asked because she was afraid of the answers. The propaganda she had accepted because believing it was easier than doubting it. Sarah stirred beside her in the darkness. Kate, are you awake? Yes. Do you think we can be forgiven for what we were part of? Catherine thought about Sergeant Cooper feeding them one spoon at a time, keeping them alive when he could have let them die. She thought about Private Washington offering her chocolate with a smile that had no hatred in it. She thought about the hot showers and clean blankets and the trust they had been given today to feed themselves. I think, Catherine said slowly, that the Americans have already forgiven us. The question is whether we can forgive ourselves. They lay in silence after that, listening to the sounds of the camp settling into night. Tomorrow they would leave for the hospital. Tomorrow Catherine would begin the work of trying to make amends. But tonight she let herself rest in the strange peace of having survived her enemy's mercy. The next morning, 7 German women climbed into the back of an American truck. Catherine, Sarah, Greta, Maria, Anna, and 2 others whose names were Elsa and Frida. They were going to Frankfurt, where a hospital had been established to care for the survivors of the camps. Sergeant Cooper came to see them off. He shook each woman's hand, a formal gesture that felt significant. When he reached Catherine, he held her hand a moment longer than necessary and looked into her eyes. What you are doing matters, he said through the translator. Do not forget that. I will not forget anything, Catherine replied. That is the problem. No, Cooper said. That is the gift. Memory is what stops us from making the same mistakes twice. Carry it, use it, teach it. Then the truck rolled away and Catherine watched the camp disappear behind them. The place where she had learned that enemies could be kind. That propaganda could lie so deeply it poisoned the very act of receiving help. That mercy was not weakness, but strength. The landscape of Germany rolled past. Ruined cities, bomb craters, burned out tanks sitting like monuments to destruction on the sides of roads. This was what war left behind. Not glory, not honor, just rubble and grief and people trying to figure out how to rebuild from ashes. 6 months later, October 1945. Catherine stood in a hospital in Frankfurt wearing a white apron over her clean dress. Her hands steady now held a bowl of thin broth. Before her sat a woman who weighed perhaps 70 pounds, nothing but bones and skin and eyes that had seen too much. Just a little, Catherine said gently in German. 1 spoonful at a time. We have to go slowly. The woman looked at her with suspicion. Catherine understood that look. She had worn it herself not so long ago, the fear of kindness. The certainty that help was really harm in disguise. I know you are scared, Catherine continued. I know you think I might hurt you. But I am going to feed you very carefully because if you eat too much too fast after starving, it can kill you. I learned that from an American doctor. He saved my life by making me eat slowly. The woman's eyes changed slightly, still afraid but curious now, too. "You were starving," she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Catherine said. "I was a prisoner. The Americans captured me. I thought they were going to poison me, but they were saving me, just like I am going to save you now." She offered the spoon. After a long moment, the woman accepted. Catherine fed her one slow spoonful at a time, counting the minutes between each bite, watching for signs of distress, offering encouragement and reassurance. Doing exactly what Private Washington had done for her. This was Catherine's work now, caring for the survivors of the camps, the people her regime had tried to exterminate, the victims of the evil she had served without knowing or without wanting to know. Every person she fed was a small act of atonement. Not enough, never enough, but something. She worked 12-hour days, fed patients who could not feed themselves, cleaned people who were too weak to wash, held hands when the nightmares came, listened to stories of horror she could barely comprehend, bore witness to suffering that her silence had helped enable. At night, she went back to the small room she shared with Sarah and lay awake thinking about everything she had learned. About the banality of evil, how ordinary people could participate in extraordinary cruelty by simply doing their jobs and not asking questions. About the power of propaganda to make good people believe terrible things. About the courage it took to change your mind when everything you believed turned out to be a lie. Sarah worked beside her at the hospital. Greta, too. They formed a small community of the formerly complicit trying to earn their way back to humanity, one patient at a time. They did not talk much about their own experiences. What was there to say? They had been on the wrong side. They had survived. Now they tried to help others survive, too. One day in April 1946, exactly 1 year after her capture, Catherine was changing bandages on an elderly man's arm when one of the nurses told her she had a visitor. American, military, asking for her specifically. Catherine found Sergeant William Cooper waiting in the hospital's small reception area. He looked the same, still tired, still carrying the weight of too much knowledge. But he smiled when he saw her, and the smile was genuine. "Sergeant Cooper," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Just Cooper now," he said through a translator who had accompanied him. "I am rotating home next month. I wanted to stop by before I left." They walked together through the hospital grounds, such as they were. A courtyard with a few benches, some struggling grass trying to grow in soil that still held the memory of bombs. "You are still here," Cooper observed. "Where else would I be?" Catherine replied. "Most people would want to forget, to move on, to put all of this behind them." Catherine shook her head. "Forgetting is easy, remembering and acting is hard, but I have to do the hard thing. I owe that much." Cooper studied her with those perceptive eyes. "You have changed." "I had good teachers," Catherine said. "An American sergeant taught me that mercy is not weakness. A young private from Alabama taught me that kindness has no nationality. Together, they taught me that being human matters more than being right." They sat on one of the benches. Cooper pulled out his notebook, the same battered journal he had carried in the camp. "I have been documenting everything," he said. "The camps we liberated, the prisoners we saved, the mistakes we made, and how we learned from them. I am writing a manual on treating severe malnutrition. It will go into the Army medical curriculum, so other medics do not have to watch people die like I did in Italy." "You are saving people you will never meet," Catherine said. "People in future wars, future famines. That matters." "What you are doing matters too," Cooper replied. "You could have gone home, tried to forget, built a quiet life and never thought about any of this again. Instead, you chose to face it, to help the very people your government tried to destroy. That takes courage." Catherine felt tears threatening. "I do not feel courageous. I feel guilty and angry and sad. Every day." "Good," Cooper said, and his voice was gentle. "The day you stop feeling those things is the day you should worry. Guilt means you have a conscience. Anger means you have not become numb. Sadness means you still care. Hold on to those feelings. They are what make you human." They sat in silence for a while, watching the afternoon light slant across the courtyard. Then Cooper stood. "I have to go, but I wanted you to know something. What you are doing here, it gives me hope. That people can change. That enemies can become something else. That the worst moments of history do not have to define the future." Thank you, Catherine said, for everything, for saving my life when I thought you were trying to end it, for showing me that the world is more complicated than I was taught, for giving me a chance to do something with what I learned. Cooper held out his hand. Catherine shook it, and then on impulse, she hugged him. A quick embrace that said more than words could. When they separated, both of them had tears in their eyes. Go home, Cooper, Catherine said. Go back to your family. You have done enough. So have you, he replied. But I do not think either of us will stop, will we? Catherine smiled. No, I do not think we will. She watched him walk away, this American who had changed her life by refusing to let her die. Then she turned and went back into the hospital, back to her patients, back to the work that would occupy her for the next 3 years. The seasons turned. Catherine continued her work. She learned more about medicine, more about nutrition, more about how to help people recover from trauma that went deeper than physical starvation. She became skilled at coaxing patients to eat, at recognizing the signs of refeeding complications before they became critical at offering comfort to people who had forgotten what comfort felt like. In 1948, she married a doctor at the hospital, a quiet man named Friedrich, who had been too young to fight in the war. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and Catherine made sure they knew the truth about what had happened. Not to burden them, but to teach them, so they would never be the kind of people who looked away when looking was hard. In 1950, she began teaching. A nursing school in Munich needed instructors, and Catherine had expertise that few others possessed. She taught young nurses how to care for malnourished patients, how to recognize the signs of starvation, how to feed someone back to health without killing them in the process. Her first lecture every semester was always the same. She would stand before a classroom of young German women and tell them her story. All of it. Her service in the Wehrmacht auxiliary, her capture by Americans, her certainty that they were poisoning her, the truth about refeeding syndrome, the concentration camps, her work at the hospital, everything. In 1945, she would say, I was starving. An American soldier fed me by hand 1 spoon at a time. I thought he was killing me. He was saving my life. That taught me something more important than any medical technique. Never assume you know someone's intentions, especially when they are trying to help you. The students would listen, their faces serious, understanding that they were receiving more than a medical lesson. They were being given a piece of history, a warning, a call to vigilance against the propaganda that had nearly destroyed an entire generation. Catherine kept a photograph on her desk. It had been taken in 1946 at the hospital in Frankfurt. It showed her standing between Sergeant Cooper and Private Washington, all 3 of them smiling despite everything. Cooper had sent it to her years later, along with a note that said simply, remember what we learned, teach others. She did. For 30 years, Catherine Weber taught nursing students about starvation and recovery. But she also taught them about propaganda and complicity, about the danger of blindly following orders, about the courage it takes to question authority, about the humanity that exists even in enemies if you are brave enough to see it. In 1975, at age 53, Catherine retired from teaching. Her children were grown. Her husband was ready to travel. But before she left Munich, she gave one final lecture. The room was packed. Former students, current students, colleagues, friends, people who had heard her story over the years and wanted to hear it one last time. Catherine stood before them, gray-haired now, but still strong, still clear-eyed, still carrying the weight of memory with grace. I have told you about refeeding syndrome, she said, about how the body can be killed by the very food that should save it. But there is another kind of starvation, a starvation of truth, of empathy, of the willingness to see humanity in people you have been taught to hate. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. In 1945, I served a regime that starved people of everything: food freedom, dignity, life itself. I did not know the full extent of what was happening, but I did not ask either. I chose ignorance because knowledge was frightening. That choice makes me complicit. I will carry that for the rest of my life. But I also learned something in 1945. I learned that people can change, that enemies can show mercy. That kindness is not weakness, but the highest form of strength. An American doctor taught me that. He did not have to save my life. I was his enemy. I had served the regime that tried to destroy everything he believed in. But he saved me anyway, because to him my humanity mattered more than my nationality. That is the lesson I want you to carry forward. In medicine, you will meet people you do not like, people who have made terrible choices, people who may have harmed others. But when they are in your care, when they are suffering, your job is to see their humanity, to treat them with dignity, to save them if you can, not because they deserve it, but because that is what being human means. The room was silent. Catherine looked at the photograph on the podium. Cooper in Washington, frozen in time, forever young, forever smiling. The world will try to tell you who your enemies are, she continued. It will give you reasons to hate, permission to look away, justifications for cruelty. Do not listen. Make your own decisions about who deserves compassion. And when in doubt, choose mercy. It is harder than hatred, and it requires more courage. But it is the only thing that stops history from repeating its worst moments. I was fed by enemies who became teachers. I was shown mercy by people I had been taught to fear. That mercy changed everything. It can change you too. It can change the world. One spoonful at a time. When she finished, the applause went on for several minutes. But Catherine barely heard it. She was thinking about a muddy camp in Bavaria, a wooden spoon, a bowl of soup, the moment when everything she believed shattered and something truer took its place. That night she wrote a letter. It took her hours to compose, working through several drafts before she was satisfied. She addressed it to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, asking them to help her find two men, Sergeant William Cooper and Private James Washington. She wanted to thank them one more time, to tell them how their kindness had rippled out through decades, touching hundreds of students, thousands of patients, changing lives they would never know about. She never got a response, but that was all right. She had said what needed saying, the letter existed, the gratitude existed, the legacy of their mercy continued. Catherine Weber died in 1998 at age 76. Her funeral was attended by more than 300 people, former students, patients she had cared for, colleagues, family, people whose lives she had touched in ways both large and small. At the service, her daughter read from Catherine's journals passages about the war and what came after, about fear and mercy and the long road back to humanity, about how propaganda works and how to resist it, about the power of asking questions even when the answers are frightening. My mother taught me, her daughter said, that history is not something that happens to other people in faraway times. It is what we make every day with our choices. She chose to serve a terrible regime because she did not know better. Then she learned better, and once she knew, she spent the rest of her life trying to do better. That is the lesson, not that she was perfect, but that she was willing to change. Among the mourners was an elderly black man who had traveled from Alabama. He approached the family after the service and introduced himself. "My name is James Washington," he said. "I knew Catherine a long time ago, in Germany, at the end of the war. I just wanted to say that she was one of the bravest people I ever met. Not because she did not have fear, but because she let that fear change into something better." Catherine's children asked him to stay, to tell them about their mother as a young woman, about the camp, about the feeding, about everything. Washington sat with them for hours, sharing memories of those strange days when enemy and liberator learned to see each other as human. He told them about Cooper, who had died 10 years earlier, about the manual Cooper had written that was still used to train military medics, about the lives saved by the knowledge gained from tragedy. "Your mother thanked me once," Washington said, "for feeding her, for being kind, but she had it backwards. She thanked me for teaching her about mercy, but really she taught me. She showed me what it looks like when someone has the courage to completely change their understanding of the world. That is harder than any battlefield courage. That is the kind of bravery that actually changes things." The story does not end there. Stories like this never really end. They ripple forward through time, touching people who never knew the original actors, teaching lessons that never stop being relevant. Catherine's teaching materials are still used in some nursing programs. Her lectures about propaganda and complicity are quoted in textbooks. Her story is told to illustrate how ordinary people can be swept up in extraordinary evil and how they can find their way back. And somewhere in America, in a country that continues to struggle with questions of mercy and justice, of who deserves compassion and who does not, Catherine Weber's lesson still matters. That sometimes the people we are taught to fear are the ones who save us. That enemies can become teachers if we are brave enough to learn. That kindness, even to those who do not deserve it, is not weakness, but the truest measure of strength. That mercy delivered one spoonful at a time can change the world. This is what America gave to a defeated enemy in 1945. Not just food and medicine and hot showers, but the gift of being seen as human when she had stopped seeing herself that way. The gift of second chances. The gift of showing that the values it claimed to stand for were real, even when it would have been easier to be cruel. Catherine Weber spent 50 years repaying that gift, teaching it, passing it forward, making sure the lesson was not forgotten. And now, more than 70 years later, that lesson still echoes. In hospital rooms where nurses carefully feed recovering patients. In classrooms where students learn about the dangers of propaganda. In moments when people choose mercy over hatred, compassion over cruelty, humanity over ideology. One spoonful at a time, one choice at a time, one act of kindness at a time. That is how you change the world. That is the legacy of Catherine Weber. That is the story of what happened when an American soldier knelt in the mud and offered food to a woman who thought he was trying to kill her. He was saving her life, and she spent the rest of hers saving others.